Well, it's been dogged by furious protests right from the start in our local towns and countryside alike. And yet the first stage of high-speed rail between Birmingham and London won the support of nearly 400 MPs 3 years ago. Now, though, come signs that the political backing may be collapsing just when HS2's delivery company finds itself embroiled in yet another dispute, this time over land earmarked for the construction phase. Peter Plisner explains why.
They've taken a sward of land through here, which is approximately 200 metres wide.
Warwickshire farmer Fred Morton showing me land taken by HS2 last year. In all, he's lost 150 acres, around a third of his farmland. But so far, he's not been paid a penny. And worse still,
currently where they've taken possession, we have no access. If we go onto this land now or tend the crops that are planted, we're actually trespassing on what is land that we still own.
HS2's taken the land and vast areas elsewhere using special powers called Schedule 16, which allows it to acquire land on a temporary basis and only buy it if it's needed permanently. The land over there will be used for things like access roads and compounds, and Fred will eventually get it back. But the land I'm standing on is expected to be used for the high-speed line itself and will be needed permanently, so he'll never get it back. What's angered Fred and others is that HS2 is using the Schedule 16 temporary possession powers to obtain the majority of the land here. Close by, we found Derek Hyatt and his daughter Sandra. They've also had land taken under Schedule 16.
What the devil do they think they're at? They move onto somebody's farm. I own the land, but they take it over. They call it compulsory purchase. Well, if it's compulsory purchase, where's the money? We've had nothing for it.
Although farmers are entitled to compensation during temporary possessions, land experts say claiming it isn't easy.
The simple point from landowners' point of view is once you take the land, you should compensate the landowner for it. The landowners should not be bankrolling HS2. If HS2 is to be built using taxpayers' money, it should be all taxpayers who are paying for it, not those who happen to be on the line of the route.
And even the National Farmers Union, which helped draft the Schedule 16 legislation, agrees that HS2 has gone too far.
So our concerns are that HS2 are just taking too long about serving the notices to take land permanently, when we think they do know the land they want permanently and they should be serving those notices straight away rather than serving a temporary notice for that land area to start off with.
Those opposed to the high-speed line go even further, claiming that with land costs spiralling out of control, Schedule 16 is allowing HS2 Limited to keep spending down.
Just like all the other costs with HS2, it's gone up and up, and they are desperate not to spend that money now because it will just make the whole thing obviously far more over budget.
HS2 has denied those claims, instead maintaining that it's using Schedule 16 as a stopgap while design work is finalised. But in an interview with this programme, it did concede that things could have been done differently.
We're going to have a look and see, can we actually do more permanent acquisition earlier? Because, you know, as you said, we've discussed this with NFU, with the CLA, with other stakeholder groups, but we've also had feedback from individual farmers, and we want to make sure that we're treating people with the respect that they deserve, because this is, after all, their land, their community that we are coming into.
And with 2/3 of all HS2 land currently under Schedule 16 possessions, that's good news for landowners everywhere.
Peter Plisner reporting from Warwickshire, and we're also joined here today by the Infrastructure Consultant Michael Byng. And Michael, you can see the difficulty in a way that HS2 have, because they're under intense pressure to control their costs. So they don't really want to firm up on their land deals completely until they know exactly how their designs shape up.
That's correct. Had they developed and completed their design, they would know exactly what the land is they required, so they keep their options open by apparently using Schedule 16.
But at least this is temporary, so in the long term, whatever the privations of the farmers now, and they're compensated for the loss of their produce, if not for the land itself, and they will, in the end, get much of that land back, one supposes.
They will get it back, but there is no obligation upon HS2 to reinstate it, make it good, return it to farmable condition. That's left to the landowner when they get them back. The other issue, of course, is that the definition of how long HS2 can take the land is in doubt. There's a feeling there is a fault in the Hybrid Act, the CPO provisions. It's actually been used, it has been tried to be used to take temporary possession of land at the podium at Euston for 18 years, and that was defeated during the petitioning stage of the bill.
Well, now you mentioned the legislation, and we know that the proposal for the further development of HS2 north of the Midlands towards Manchester and Leeds is due in Parliament towards the end of this year. So how would you assess the prospects now, given all this talk about political support eroding for it, despite all those nearly 400 MPs or so, that the prospects now for north of Birmingham, or indeed Birmingham and London?
The prospects are grim, to say the least, because HS2...
Grim meaning?
The future of the project could be in doubt for the simple reason HS2 has not defined the scope of its works. It can't produce a detailed estimate of cost, as was admitted before the House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee recently, so therefore it has to keep its options open. And this uncertainty on landowners will just continue.
To be clear, are you critical of the concept of a high-speed line like this, or the way the proposals are being put together?
No, absolutely not. I'm in favour of a high-speed line. I'm also in favour of high-speed rail. To put it quite bluntly, what I'm not in favour of is a poorly managed and poorly created project, which HS2 is.
As an infrastructure specialist yourself, I mean, maybe your advice could be played into it. Maybe isn't that something you ought really to offer?
I have offered it. I've offered the only independent estimate for HS2 Phase 1, which at 55.995 billion is twice what the government's funding envelope is. I've offered the documents, the details to HS2. They've never taken me up on it, nor have they looked at details I've done of the work between Euston and Old Oak Common, in Colne Valley, Wendover, through Kenilworth and Southam constituencies. They just ignore it.
Okay, for the moment, just obviously much of that was filmed in Warwickshire, as I mentioned, so you don't need me to tell you that you've got lots of angry farmers on your hands about this. What are they saying?
We have, and of course, the problem is that we've got 31 miles through Warwickshire with no stops. So, there is a question about the benefit. That said, we're a very long way down the line. The legislation has been put in place in the House. To undo that, they would have to take that legislation apart and vote against it, and then recompensate everybody. I think the practical fact that we have to do as a council is we have to support our communities through this process. So,
but given the uncertainties about the entire project that Michael Byng's just been talking about, do you think, given so much of the regeneration strategy for the West Midlands as a whole rests on it, that we've become over-invested in this one project?
So the question for me is, we have a Phase 1 and we have a Phase 2. Phase 1 in legislation is probably more difficult to undo.
London, Birmingham.
Yep. Phase 2, arguably, I think, and you've talked about the legislation coming forward this year. So that, I think, is a challengeable issue, and particularly bearing in mind the costs which are escalating so much. The problem I see with HS2 is they are a project board, but they aren't an engagement board, and we need to be part of that engagement.
Given, of course, Gareth, that this line, the proposed second part of it, will indeed or would go through Staffordshire, albeit not through your constituency. Maybe you can give us a sort of objective assessment of where you think this is going.
Well, I mean, when the Phase 2A bill was put before the House of Commons, I spoke against it because, much like Izzi with the case of Warwickshire, Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent will adhere quite a lot of pain in terms of the route going through the county with no benefits whatsoever. We're told Stoke might get a compatible service, but we're not told what impact that would have on the existing fast train services. And frankly, I'm a member of the Public Accounts Committee, and it appalls me whenever I see the overspends that HS2 keep repeating, and the abuse of the Section 16 powers seems to be something that needs to be looked at urgently.
But these things always escalate. Look at Crossrail. There's not such a big debate about cutting Crossrail, but that's ballooned to 40 billion, I think, at the last count, cutting across London. Yeah, well, that's because infrastructure spending in London seems to be whatever it needs to be in London, and the rest of the country can go hang. Political double standards, as far as you can see, that politicians are more lenient about the nation's capital.
They tend to be rather more generous in the per capita spending. Just to correct you about Crossrail, Crossrail 1 is 15 billion, which will escalate to 21. Crossrail 2 is 42 billion, and that's the one that's causing the problems. there are reasons for it. It's new technology.
The problem here in our part of the country is you've got so many MPs who get the pain and no gain. They get the line going through their areas and they don't get stations. So isn't that an inherent difficulty in terms of the political sell, if you like, for HS2?
Well, it is absolutely. I mean, I act for most of the district councils in the Kenilworth and Southam constituency.
Who are hostile to it.
Hostile is putting it politely.
But that may influence your view of it, I suggest, as well.
No, it doesn't, with respect.
Okay.
If you're going to build a railway, you're going to have to get on with it and do it.
Okay.
As the French said when they built the TGV years ago, you can't make an omelette without cracking any eggs.
Indeed.
And that just happens to be it. I also act for people close to Gareth's constituents. I act for people at Stone and Swinnerton and at Whitmore, where the disturbance there is going to be even greater than in Warwickshire, and it is to be hoped that basically HS2 learn the experiences from Warwickshire.
On which prospect we must leave it for this moment. Thank you very much indeed. Particular thanks to you, Michael Byng, for being with us here today.